Hello, boxing fight fans around the world. Thanks for joining us again on Talk and Fight for another episode of The Scoop featuring the champ, Bola Ray, who has himself been going around the world telling us great stories from great fighters and great fights and great rivalries. But it's a new week, and I'm sure you've got a new story for us from another part of the world, unless I'm completely mistaken.
No, no,
What do you
no.
got for us? What do you got for us, big guy?
In essence, with the proceedings moving forward with the trials for the officers in the George Floyd murder case, I am brought to wonder exactly how far has society actually progressed since, at least here in the West, since the 1930s and 1940s.
Hmm.
For no reason other than the color of the man's skin, their intelligence, their moral compass, their worthiness of different titles, athletically and corporate, was not just judged but limited. Now, volumes of books have been written about the root cause of systemic racism. But what is much more troubling for me is the fact that society hasn't moved that far from a period when the times mentality was so lax and backwards. Last week, I dedicated all the episodes to the unsung heroes, if you will. The specific group called the Black Murderers Row, which were absolute greats that were permitted, that if they were permitted to compete for world titles, they all arguably would have changed the course of history, not just by winning several titles, but of upsetting the champions of the day. Now, in my ongoing series, we talked today about another man from this particular fraternity who went up from the ranks of middleweight and finished off his career at light heavyweight and still dominated. A fighter whose actual name was in question, but his final residence was known accurately, which actually speaks volumes about how underrated history has portrayed him. My name is Bola Raymond Olubuwale, and this is The Scoop. Born January 27th, 1914, in Sherman, Texas, was none other than Jack Chase. There wasn't much information about his early life or how he started boxing other than he had an exceptional amateur career and he fought totally out of Colorado. Now, by his teen years, he had moved out of Texas to a tough mining town called Wallaceburg, Colorado, where he began his boxing career and amassed quite the record. There was rumors that he may have as many as 40 more fights professionally than the record books actually depict. All the same, January 30th, 1936 was reportedly Jack's first professional fight. Now, recently released from prison, he goes on to beat Billy Pryor in an effort, and for his efforts, the crowd boos him. Welcome to the big leagues, my man. And that's his first fight. Joe goes on to continue fighting the whole time under the name of Young Joe Louis, who was and has a great deal of accolades for his efforts in the way of state championships, such as in his fifth fight, he wins the Rocky Mountain Regional Middleweight title. Okay. This fight is listed as being on April 1st, 1936, but for whatever reason, there's no documentation found pretty much anywhere corroborating that date. But okay. Things were slightly somewhat lax in those days. So what can you say? Shortly after that, on June 26th, same year, he has his 8th fight and wins the USA Colorado State middleweight title against a Mike Montoya. All right, 8 fights, 2 titles. Back in these days, these things were a little different, but Jack goes on to fight for the USA Colorado State welterweight championship in a unification scenario where his USA Colorado middleweight strap was also up at the same time. Now, today, a fighter can be a multiple weight class champion, but in defending it, they must defend one weight class at a time. Things were different back then. He goes on to fight and win against Joe Jaramillo, August 20th, 1936. And now he has 2 belts. Well, now with his 2 belts, he is on his resume, he opens the door for a mega fight. Now, this mega fight in which 2 champions from 2 different states, which both have 2 titles, are going to fight each other for all 4 titles. Or more importantly, they're going to fight for the interstate mountain championship fight. This fight is up against Utah's Jackie Burke, who also has the Utah State middleweight and welterweight title. Now, Chase goes on to win a one-sided beating that goes the distance for 12 rounds. But what I find incredibly noteworthy is that this was Jack's 15th fight without a loss. And he's making history like this. Okay? Now, in accordance to BoxRec, Jack lost his first fight on his 24th fight. But yet other sources have it as Jack's 66th fight. At this point, when he faces off against Eddie Pierce of South Africa, who was the South African middle and light heavyweight champion. Now, Pierce apparently won 8 of 10 rounds, but also claims that, Jack was a good puncher. By 1937, Jack had proven that he wasn't just a great puncher, but also an incredible boxer. And along with that came notoriety through Ringside Magazine, which had him ranked in the top 10 in the country. Unfortunately for Jack, he found himself in a situation which rendered him a longtime guest at the Colorado State Gray Bar Motel. Now, this is insight into how poorly black fighters were being treated or rewarded, compensated for their gift back in the day. Jack, at this point, had multiple titles within the U.S., but he felt it necessary to commit a crime like burglary with force to make ends meet. Like, that's ludicrous today. Look at today, at any fighter that's ranked in the top 10 of their division in the United States, and see exactly how much money they're making per purse. They would be making more than enough to sustain themselves, and you wouldn't have to resort to petty stupidity like this. This was a disappointing read. Jack was sentenced to 6 to 8 years, but he was ended up being released early on good behavior, May of 1941. Now, upon release, the very next month, Jack has a fight, another fight. He's back in the ring, and he's doing what he does, and again, Lady Luck was out getting a pedicure the night, because even though Jack won his fight against his opponent, Roy Jack Gillespie, who was having his professional debut against Jack Chase by this point. Yeah. He was stopped in the first minute of the 6th round. And, yeah. He died 3 days later in the hospital. The blood should be seen on the hands of the athletic commissioner for permitting such a fight, in my most humblest opinion. This wasn't Jack. He had an opponent across the ring from him. He had to do what he had to do to win the fight. Jack then has a fight again with his old foe, Billy Pryor, in which he wins for the 3rd time and then moves to California and drops his hold, young Joe Louis, for good. Just Jack from here on in. All right. Now, during the 40s, the professional game in the West Coast boasted some of the best fighters in the United States, if not in the world. And this new arrival soon found himself trading leather with the likes of like Archie Moore, Eddie Booker, like Lloyd Marshall, Tiger Wade, and, well, Charlie Burley. A veritable who's who of black pugilists. The Black Murderers Row, to be precise, actually. Chase quickly established himself and won the California State middleweight title by defeating Eddie Booker in a 15-round decision. Then goes on to lose it and then re-win it against none other than the inimitable Archie Moore. 2 successful defenses against Lloyd Marshall were notched up to great in 2 title fights, only to lose before he ran into the great Charlie Burrell. Chase was stopped twice by the Pittsburgh Great and lost another fight to Charlie via decision. Charlie beat some of the top names of the game, but 2 guys he just couldn't beat were the aforementioned Burley and sadly neglected Holman Williams, who he lost from 4 times. Yeah, this is sad. This is a black eye on history, to say the least. Early in 1944, Jack made headlines again, but this time, not because of boxing news, at least not really. Jack shot fellow fraternity member Ern Tiger Wade. Now, Wade recovered and continued his boxing career, but he ended up running into Chase again, at which point in time Chase knocked him out in the 10th round for his troubles. 1944, Jack lost his middleweight strap to Charlie Burley, but only to win the state light heavyweight title against Watson Jones. Now, then it seemed that somebody turned out the enthusiasm light switch. Victories became few and far between, and yet he continued to fight. It was surmised that Chase was doing what so many other black fighters did in the day, where they're only fighting to stay afloat financially, as opposed to looking to improve their record and fight for a world title, because fighting for a world title just was not a reality. Jack Chase died March 23rd, 1972 at the age of 58. Rest in peace, sir. Well, thank you for the memories. Now, that's my show. If you like this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget the notification bell. It's your boy Bola, and that's the scoop.
Wow. Out of curiosity, how many members of Black Murderers Row were there?
8. There's one more tomorrow. Yeah.
And out of curiosity, if these guys were all fighting in, say, the 30s, 40s,
yeah,
do you think it's possible that someone who we've discussed earlier, whether Chicago or New York or one of those kinds of areas, Boston, recognized what the potential was of these boxers, if in fact they simply were this broke and easy to obtain, if you will, as employees on one hand, but as prize fighters on the other. And I wonder if, I'm just saying out loud, I wonder if in the 50s that's why it became more of a combined effort, if you will, between the people with power, the people with money, and the people who didn't have power and the people who didn't have money, because they were good in the ring and they could make an awful lot for their employers in things such as gambling, which must have been huge money.
That's an understatement. In essence, what happened was the mob. The mob got in there. They saw these guys. They're desperate and they're willing to work. But what are they good at? They're good at punching people out. So what ends up happening? They go off. They sign them. Now sometimes they sign them and make them superstar champions, like Ray Robinson,
right?
Or so many white counterparts. But other times, what just happened, which was nothing shy of a crime, was these blacks ended up just congregating out in California way, putting on sensational bouts against each other, high technical fights. And not being compensated whatsoever. They didn't get compensated. Well, some of them got some compensation from the mob, which usually was at the end of their career, and they're washed up, but they still need money. But it's nothing shy of sad and heartbreaking for me. So,
for all of us. Wow, it's a story worth telling, and you've told it well so far, and it's not yet over. So we look forward to tomorrow night's episode and your concluding thoughts on all this. This has been a remarkable history lesson, seriously.
Cheers.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thank you, good listenership, good viewership, for tuning in for another episode of The Scoop with the champ, Bola Ray, and we'll see you tomorrow night.